Welcome to Warblog. Today we're looking at the death of Major General Qassem Soleimani in Iraq. It's quite sort of big news at the moment, and I thought I'd do it. I didn't think of doing it at first. It wasn't something that sort of crossed my mind. And as I did it, I realised I haven't done the Iraqi riots yet either, so I feel a bit guilty about that. But it just seemed to follow on really from this previous one here, the death of Musabimano Juvenal in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it seems that this guy was quite significant because he was the leader of the Hutu Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda. And, by taking him out, they pretty much sort of chopped the head off the beast, so to speak, or at least that's the thinking. But, no one cares about this sort of particular area of conflict. I'm not saying they don't, but, it certainly wasn't really exceptional news. It was just an operation to take out, a senior figure in a rebel force. But when this happens, it's sort of like it's quite a different thing, but it's the same. The principle is the same. What the US appear to have been doing is using drone strikes. I've actually got aircraft in there. I haven't changed the thing for drones because it's a bit busy actually making the game work. So game stuff, but they're drones, I think. I just read it on the BBC because it's still happening. But anyway, so there's actually three elements to this, but I've only put in two. In the morning, they actually take out, it says it down here, I've written a little bit about it. Looks like I haven't mentioned it. Essentially, the morning before, they take out some other high-ranking people, also very near to Baghdad International Yawinauk. I'm joking. International Airport. I should maybe just make it Baghdad Airport. But anyway, so essentially they do a missile strike or a drone strike. We don't really know yet. But the BBC seems to be saying it's a drone strike and no one knew before, so that's maybe what it was. It would make sense. And so they take out this guy. Now the thing is with this guy here, Qassem Soleimani, he's like the head of the Qods, the Qods force, which is responsible for sort of overseas operations in places like Lebanon, and was key in a lot of the operations against ISIS, of all things, in Iraq. So basically the US have sort of bombed him. So they bombed a bunch of people who are fairly high up in the PMU, the Popular Mobilization Units, also at Baghdad Airport, which I haven't included. They've taken this guy out, who is the head of the Quds forces, and the second most powerful person in Iran. So they've really sort of, hit the hornet's nest with this one. And I've got some hornets. They occasionally pile up in the garage. You open the door and there's this hornet's nest, and then that's it. They're after you. But they also get this guy, who is part of the Polish mobilization units, I think, Mahdi al-Muhandis, and they get a bunch of other people as well. So this is the second sort of drone strike. There's the one earlier with a bunch of other leaders. This one with the most powerful leader in Iran, and a bunch of other people. And then the following day, they carry out another strike. And I've read that they've basically been doing a lot of these airstrikes on commanders. And it just seems to me that if you consider, the concept of doing that, it just seems to me that this is a very important scenario because it's very similar in concept. There's the guy there who Musibadama Juvenile, and this seems to be when because obviously this site is all about war, and there's lots of different ways to wage war, and going after the leaders with these precision munitions seems to me to be quite an interesting way of doing it. Because the thing is, I've been thinking about it, not too intently, because it's only just happened, but as I've been doing it, I've been thinking about it, and I had a few interesting thoughts. And the thing is, I don't really want to jump straight to this, but I might as well, because it just maybe make it easier to put things into perspective. But basically, there was a lot of talk about whether or not to assassinate Hitler, and they didn't want to because he was a bit mad. Well, this is the premise, I think, at least in the Dirty Dozen, or one of these films where they get to shoot Hitler, but they don't because they need to keep him in power so that he messes things up. But the bottom line is, if you were to have shot Adolf Hitler, would the Third Reich have actually still pretty much done the same thing? I mean, was he so influential? And the other thing is, so that's that. This is, it's a timeless question. What happens if you do? Well, they've taken this main guy out, and apparently he was fairly key in developing policy in overseas operations. And what difference will that make? And if you do take out all the senior command figures, how will it actually shape the consensus of the military operation? I mean, could it be that they were such strong figures that having them like strong gang figures, that having them actually removed will free up a lot of other people to be a little less bothered? And the thing is, the Iranians are getting really irate about it, and well, you sort of imagine that, and you can always expect that, but the thing is, it's one of these things where you realise that at that level it's a very different game. There's no sort of his mum's upset, I mean, he was an agent of death along with everyone else in the military. I mean, life and death goes with the territory, and you got to sort of think, well, hang on. So in this war, we got this entity called the United States that is capable of, utter annihilation. I mean, just simply because they have the bombs and the capability for doing massive amounts of destruction. I mean, just looking at the Idlib advance and Aleppo and Mosul. I mean, how about if you could have done all that with these precision munitions? Just keep looking and waiting for these people who are in command to sort of, pop out to the shops for a packet of crisps or something, and you can take them out bit by bit. No soldiers die, very little collateral damage. It just seems to me to be actually quite a cunning move, because it also does open up the scope for sort of people to sort of say, well, okay, we're really angry, but okay, well, we're not really, because we sort of got a grasp of the bigger picture, really. The bigger picture being that only him and the people very close to him died, which is saving a lot of people. And they might sort of come to terms with that. I'm not saying, I don't want to stoke any Iranian ill feeling or anything like that, but it just seems to me that they're not stupid, and we'll be able to see it both ways, really. But the other thing with taking out the commanders in that way is that let me just have a think. No, I can't remember what I was going to say. I'm pretty sure that my main 2 points were that they're obviously saving a lot of ground forces, and these people, agents of death, etc., not in an insulting way. I mean, death comes with the territory. I mean, being blown up, is not what you didn't expect at some point. I saw a picture of the guy that replaced him and didn't look too pleased. He'll probably be walking around with an umbrella day or night. No, not really. And it did make me wonder whether or not they have doubles. I mean, they had a picture of him with his ring, but you never know really. But the other thing that I did think about when I was trying to think, and then now I have just forgotten because I'm a bit senile, was I was actually thinking just recently that it seems that the US would I sort of predicted that they would assault Iran, in some way, and obviously these are happening in Iraqi soil, and so they've got the premise that they're defending themselves. But all that's a bit vague. I mean, they haven't assaulted Iranians on Iranian soil, and if you look at it, they're actually assaulting a lot of Iraqis. So I don't know why the Iranians are so upset. Obviously, we're not trying to insult them or anything, but this seems to me to be their big attack. I mean, if you can take out their high command in the Iran-Iraq war, the Iranians actually got rid of all their. I think it was the Iraqis actually got rid of all their. I think they both got rid of all their experienced officers because no one trusted anyone, and so they ended up with all these. I think in Iraq, it was nepotism, or everyone was Saddam Hussein's brother or cousin, or some sort of relative of Saddam Hussein. They were being promoted to the officer class, and on the Iranian side, they didn't trust any of their officers, so they basically, they got rid of them all, to say the least, and replaced them with, more religiously zealot sort of individuals, which wasn't particularly good, and apparently, this was a major handicap to both sides, really, because they got rid of all the experienced people. But I think that by taking out, if they're going to continue doing this, then it's got to have an effect on the overall capability of Iran to actually even sort of have the will to continue doing whatever it is they're doing. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say, really. I don't want to sort of dwell on it too much. I just thought I had some good ideas, and I had a good idea, and I'll probably remember it after. But anyway, so play it. Now, I've actually played this a few times now, so I sort of know what happens, because it's one of these things. It's sort of, because it never happens really. It wasn't actually working properly. I was getting like 1-to-1 odds against this leader with this air-powered unit. Well, that wasn't right. So basically, I put in some code and I've rejigged it all. And basically, you can't. Well, I'm not sure how the elimination thing works, but they will get to do a morale check because they'll get so much damage. Basically, when this hits, it will do between 4 and 12 damage, and to be quite honest, that's irrelevant to their size. To be quite honest, should maybe have thought about that, but they'll basically get between, because it's an airstrike, so it's going to be standard. I don't think any one leader would be any tougher than any other leader, and I don't think any more explosives would be any any different to anything else. So something to think about anyway, for me, because I've only just thought about it just exactly then. And these should probably be drones, but anyway, not to worry. It's air units. So as you can see, I've changed it now because it was a bunch of gibberish. I never really bother with these, but because I was sort of sitting there, I thought I would. So this is sort of unique for this particular situation. So airstrike on command unit damage 6 and 7. So you know they both would have done a morale check, and they both obviously passed. I put 2 units in because they seem to have had 2 attacks, 2 missile strikes on each. So we've actually got him. There you go. He got blown up, but this other guy seems to have escaped with 14 damage. So that was like a 90% chance of routing. So he did well too. He's probably in intensive care. So that's that. Now, obviously, they're not going to run away because it's the next day. So we just pass on that. So the next day, we do exactly the same again. And these are all PMU units. This is... the thing's not mousing over. So we blew him up on the first one. With 12. And we got the other 2. So our attacks went in. We got everyone in al-Taji camp. And this guy is, he's probably lost the leg. He's probably lost everything other than his leg. But he's still alive. But that's that really. And I just think this is probably, quite significant. And I think I don't know, I think it's quite clever to some extent, because it's not what everyone was imagining. You're sort of thinking, well, what could the Americans do? What can the Americans do? You're thinking, what can they do? Are they going to do an airstrike on their, nuclear power plant? Are they going to bomb Tehran? Are they going to sort of, do a land invasion? What could they do? And the thing is, this is actually quite a masterstroke, really, in the sense that, they've been using these ninja bombs that come out of the sky and cut cars up. And, it seems that, by developing dominion in space and that sort of command and control, if you can just sit there, just, surveying everything and just carrying out, death from the heavens, so to speak, it would actually make a very clean way to win a war. You just go around and take out all the command elements. And, as I said sort of earlier on in the sort of dialogue, if you could actually go out and take out Hitler and all of his high command, what would actually happen? Would they just have been instantly replaced with eager and energetic young officers? Or would the sort of, whoever replaced them, like new management, want to put their own stamp on things and maybe play a completely different game? Maybe sort of, not invade Russia. Maybe, and I sort of think, well, how instrumental was Hitler in actually, because I don't know really much about the Second World War, but how instrumental was he in actually making the decision to invade Poland? I think he probably was, because I think from memory he invaded Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia first for living space. I think it's Czechoslovakia. And that was more of a sort of an unopposed invasion. And then the attack on Poland was, obviously planned. But, it could be that, he wasn't doing it on his own. It's like Trump. He's not. He gives the impression of being a dictator or someone that's sort of, doing things on his own without telling anyone. But, he's obviously got a huge body of people behind him that actually want him to do these things. He's probably listening to his advisors, and they're giving him some options and basically telling him what to do. But obviously, being president, he's sort of thinking, well, he's he's been given options and then making the best decisions. And so, I mean, who's going to replace this guy? Is he going to be as as dangerous as the one that they've just taken out, or will he be maybe more what's the word? Not as aggressive, a more passive type, personality in high command. Because once they get over it, they'll start to realise, well, gee, that's actually not so bad. At least they didn't take out a major city. At least they didn't do, masses and masses of damage like they've done in, I mean, maybe Russia and Assad could, pick up a lesson on that, but maybe not, because, I mean, this is a high-ranking figure. I mean, but you could go around just sort of, taking them all out from space. I mean, there's this big stuff about lasers, and I can't remember who it was actually, but someone has just developed a laser to take out drones, and it can take out a balloon. And I don't know why people would use balloons. I think it's the Israelis actually. And it was a student project in one of the Israeli universities, and they can pop a balloon of all things, because apparently the bad guys, I don't know who it is, the Hamas people, I think, or Hezbollah, people in the Gaza Strip, they attach bombs to balloons and they float them over, and then they obviously drop or something. But they can use this laser to pop the balloon sort of almost within half a second, and with concentrating the laser on a drone, not a drone, like a helicopter thing, like you can get from the internet or something, they need to target for about 3 seconds, and then the laser will burn through the plastic and destroy what's inside. But I know they got more higher powered pulse lasers that from a distance, either horizontally or vertically, can basically burn straight through a car bonnet and into an engine block, causing it essentially to explode. So all you need is a couple of these sort of lasers, and you don't even need them in low Earth orbit. You could actually probably put them, if you had air superiority, into one of these like C-10 massive, whatever they are, these massive things that have artillery pieces in the side of them. And you could fire this laser cannon, and you could just go around in circles, or you could actually place it in low Earth orbit. I'm not sure how you would supply, but I'm pretty sure they've actually thought of these sorts of things already. But you can just sit there, firing and taking out leaders one at a time, with absolute precision, accuracy. So much so that people would not be afraid to sit next to them for lunch or dinner, because if they're going to get a laser bolt through the head, it's not going to affect them unless it's a bit messy. But anyway, I just think that a lot of people are sort of thinking, well, this is what is Iran going to do, and I think that somewhere in Iran there's going to be people that are nodding in some sense, it's not. This could be a lot worse. I mean, there is a sort of a virtual state of conflict, and they might not do anything. But the only thing I would say about Iran and Egypt and Syria, especially so, they've taken so much crap. I mean, Americans seem to think that they've taken a lot of crap, but in particular from Israel. I mean, Israel seems to be carrying out airstrikes like every week. And to be quite honest, when you put it into perspective, it's almost as though they're actually already at war. But Israel are constantly striking out at Iranian resources at the airports close to Israel when they set their base up, and there's, I can't, to be quite honest, it slipped my mind really, but in a sense of exactly what's what. But time and time again, there have been examples of, this news article, Israel doing airstrike, and they've flown all across Syria, and they've bombed something along the sort of the Deir Zor border area in Iraq. They're fairly bolshy with regards to that, and it seems to me that it's like when Russia lost their aircraft to Turkey. It seems that Syria and Russia have taken a lot of whacks without actually sort of doing anything. You would have thought that Russia would have gone in and tit for tat, an eye for an eye, so to speak. But they haven't really. None of these have, and I think one of the reasons they haven't is because they really don't want to stir up the hornet's nest too much. They've been stung and they keep getting stung, but they can't afford to go and whack the hornet's nest because they can't destroy it in one go. And I think Israel and also America in this instance, because you've got to remember, America did a massive airstrike a while back. I did it in here. It wasn't. I can't remember what it was now. I'll never find it. But it was they basically bombed multiple targets in Syria after some sort of, there was something. Oh, it was that canister, wasn't it? It was the when they had the nerve gas that they said that Syria used, that they have since found out was a complete lie or something like that. But basically America went and bombed multiple targets across Syria as in consequence. But they've been doing this for a while now, and I'm not sure what Iran can possibly do. I mean, they can drive around in their little speedboats, they can harass shipping, but there's been a lot of people who have been putting troops there. I mean, 5,000 US troops now going to Iraq. There's other foreign nations who are sending ships with the pretense of supporting shipping in the in the Straits of Hormuz and around the Middle East there. I mean, one nation was, I think it's Japan. Japan have sent a ship to protect shipping, but they're not doing the bit that's very close to Iran because they're quite closely tied to Iran for trade purposes. But it seems to me that that war is actually going on, and I don't know what Iran can do. I don't think they can do much really, because there are no major sensitive targets unless you wake up tomorrow and they've just gone all out on any US assets. I mean, they sort of, because I think the reason they sort of targeted this guy who's not here was because he was instrumental in supporting or engineering there he is there, Qassem Soleimani, in sort of managing or instigating the riots at the US embassy, where they managed to get into the internal perimeter. And I think they pretty much blamed him for that. These people, it wasn't just sort of a spontaneous uprising of people protesting. It was mainly this guy's quad forces, sort of in semi-disguise. I mean, they weren't even really disguised. They were all wearing military uniforms, but they just weren't armed. So they're just sort of, being very aggressive. And I think that, other than that, I mean, unless they actually sort of pulled up a bunch of artillery pieces and just started pounding them and then just surrounded every US force, because that's the only thing they can do. They can't get to America. That's one thing, they just can't. They can't get the assets there. Wherever they're based outside of the Middle East, I mean, they can't get, they basically can't get their carrier fleet or their naval fleet. I mean, they're probably going to be well too defended. I don't know where they are at the moment. But I doubt that they could do that. But I mean, I don't know. I just sort of think, well, maybe this sort of change will we'll sort of, after if they can get through a week, we'll pacify Iran, thinking, well, it could have been a lot worse, because they could make a huge mistake here in something or other. And I think, from what I can gather, that one of the big things that a lot of people sort of think is the big problem, the reason why America can't attack Iran, is because even if they could, they've got enough firepower to make it very painful for a lot of the immediate neighbours. I mean, the alleged Yemeni sort of strike on the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia was an example of that. I mean, when that happened, oil prices are going up now, but if Iran just suddenly feels, well, this is it, it's an all or nothing situation, they've probably got all their targets sorted out. So it's probably goodbye to half of Saudi Arabia, and it's probably goodbye to a hell of a lot of Israel. And I mean, I'm not sure what other sort of areas and targets they could have. But so it could go, sort of either way, really. But I think, it's a fairly interesting move, because it's not the sort of, I don't know, I think bombing airports, for example, when they bombed the Syrian airports where the Iranians were, and military targets, these are expensive. They're more, they can actually almost claim cause belli with those sorts of things. And even with this, I was reading in one of the articles, it was saying that this attack will give Iran a lot more credibility in the international opinion, in international opinion, because they've been a victim. This was almost, some people are calling it an assassination of this guy that Iran is making it very clear has been instrumental in helping the Iraqis to defeat ISIS. I mean, the Polish mobilization units, you can see on this blog, were key, in putting a lot of pressure onto ISIS and fighting ISIS in a lot of locations back when the war in Iraq was on. And so, they're really painting him out to be this sort of, brave and noble military commander. I have no opinion, because I don't really know exactly what they do. All I know is that he's involved with overseas operations, and then they're talking about Lebanon. So presumably he's sort of, special operations, covert operations, which will probably involve IEDs and assassinations and all that sort of stuff. So he's probably got blood on his hands somewhere along the lines. Maybe not, well, probably personally, but obviously as the head of that organisation. So I don't know. I mean, in theory, we could see sort of drastic headlines, but it's not as though they're. I think that Iran and America are not neighbours, so it's not as though they can just sort of they can actually attack America. All they can do is, at the very worst, is maybe propagate some terrorist style actions against American interests, and or seriously hurt Saudi Arabia and Israel in some sort of regard. But even now, I just can't see that actually really happening. I mean, to sort of attack Israel. I mean, Israel's pretty tough in their own right. They're probably, I mean, the only reason they wouldn't want to escalate things too much is because it would be bloody on both sides. So Iran's a bit stuffed, actually, I think. And it might feel compelled to do something, which will only make things worse, or they might just sort of stand down, on the basis that, the new leaders will, take face, will just turn face on it, turn a cheek, so to speak. But I don't know. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. I thought I'd just do this game. mainly because the parallel to this just seemed so acute. I sort of thought, hang on, this is exactly what I did, and I called it the death of Musa bin Mana Juvenal, and I thought, that's just, that's the 11th of November, 2019. So, about 2 months later, we get the death of Major General Qassem Soleimani. Okay, I'll leave it at that, and I'll speak to you later. Cheerio.